Hey, folks, welcome to Strong Towns. Ask Strong Towns anything. I almost called it office hours, which is what this weekly session used to be called. But we really wanted to refine the idea that there is almost nothing that we can't talk about together. And we want to be able to give thought to these things from a Strong Towns perspective. How do we engage with these thorny, complex challenges that we face in our communities? Our guest today, who's going to be joining us in just a moment, is Damian Mavis. He's an advocate for strong, resilient communities in San Luis Obispo. He is professionally a core member of Covelop, which is a development company that is working on projects that really align with the ideas of fiscal responsibility, as well as creating stronger neighborhoods, really livable places. One of Damian's recent contributions was helping to bring Strong Towns, the Escaping the Housing Trap presentation to his community in San Luis Obispo. And the event was a huge success. There was over 100 people that came together, community members, local leaders, and advocates that were eager to rethink housing policies and do so from even consideration of what Strong Towns was identifying as many of the core contributing factors to the state of housing, but also to the question of what do we do now about the situation that we find ourselves in. And so if you are joining us on YouTube, I hope there's still time for you to join us also tomorrow for the member exclusive event with Ali Quinlan and Eric Kronberg and Chuck Marohn talking about housing and particularly presenting a toolkit for cities to become more housing ready. Eric and Ali are experienced developers and project leads, and their work really is able to help shine light on many of the barriers that are unnecessarily put in place of incremental development. And out of that, what we've brought together is through a housing working group and through the various projects that we've seen mature over time is a toolkit for cities to be housing ready. I do want to highlight as well, we've created a site, strongtowns.org/housing ready, where you can actually ask questions of your community and share these types of resources and make them available. Also, if that's not enough, there's more. We also have locomotive tickets now on sale. These tickets are available at a discounted rate to members if you use the member discount code. And out of that, what the focus of these spring sessions in our locomotive sessions are going to be on taking local action and finding ways in order to build a deeper, sort of more sustained movement for change within your community. So that's coming up March 20th to April 24th. Just an encouragement to check that out. Today, we're focused on incremental development and neighborhood investment because a key part of the shift that we need to see in the housing landscape across North America is for housing to be relocalized, for the production of housing and for the embrace of housing to be something that goes hand in hand, often because it is the local actors that are actively making the difference in their community. A group that I lead, Deltons for People-Oriented Places, we are actively working to create more housing and better land use in our community. And we were inspired by a group down in Bothell, Washington, that on the one hand said, hey, look, we have these out-of-state housing developers that are coming in and dropping in projects that have no understanding of the local context. They're often doing so because they've been incentivized to do this, and yet they lack the capacity to actually build the things that we need in our community. But simultaneously, Kerry Westerbeck, who was the leader of BOPOP, he himself as an architect had tried to bring a very modest 3-story commercial on the ground floor, as well as 2 layers of housing above it, that project forward, and was met with barrier after barrier after barrier. And the question is, what is it that we can do in order to allow the next increment of development to emerge within our communities without putting so many roadblocks and barricades to the type of things that we actually genuinely want to see within our communities? But let's start with Josh. So he said at a recent common council meeting in Madison, Wisconsin, the council asked about Strong Towns' views on covenants. And he had the same question. What is the Strong Towns approach to a covenant or a contract that restricts land to a single family home and does not allow neighborhoods to thicken? And I'm going to throw the question over to my colleague, Edward Erfurt, who's our chief technical advisor and the director of action for Strong Towns in just a moment. But this question sort of began with first the question, what are these covenants and how commonplace are they? And in many of our communities, they're very common. Entire neighborhoods having these covenants established with them, and cities actively upholding them and actively ensuring that these covenants are basically leaving neighborhoods entirely sacrosanct. And what comes to mind is the image of a duck that you have placed, not because it was curious, but because we've done this by design, placed plastic rings around their neck. The thing is, they'll be okay unless they need to grow. They'll be fine if they stayed in just the state that they are when it first slipped on. But from that point onwards, it becomes more and more costly and becomes more and more of a burden to bear. And this is the context. So we would say from a strong town's perspective that individuals may certainly establish covenants. We see this where, for instance, a senior that says, hey, look, my home, I will sell it, but if it ever is owned by, an out-of-state investor, that basically will trigger it becoming a local park. Or you see all sorts of different things that people in their individual capacity are doing, and we would say that would be very normal. You can register all sorts of things on title, and this is just part of a natural process. You can restrict redevelopment. There are many of those types of things where we would say if it's an individual choice, if it's a private covenant that's being privately upheld, this can be one of those things that is just another quirk of your community. However, it's very different when it is a part of public policy. And as we see where entire neighborhoods have these covenants attached to them, where even at the request of individual property owners to remove those covenants, cities slow walk it or basically have no expectation that they will take action on these things. Sometimes they don't want to risk the ire of other neighbors, but oftentimes they either don't want to bother with the paperwork involved, or in the case of Delta, the city of Delta here, the realization that they had was, well, this is a very effective way of restricting growth. This is a very effective way of continuing to constrain supply in these areas, limiting entire swaths of our single-family detached neighborhoods to simply being as they are. Until councils began to emerge and say, we can actually, if we establish these covenants and we hold these covenants, we can actually dispense with them rather quickly as well. And so again, a key contrast, you should be able to do what you need to do with your own property. And if you want it to become, deeded so that later down the road, it is set apart as a park, or it becomes, the site for a new library once you die, that can be done. But it's very different when you do this at scale across entire neighborhoods and then use the force of public policy and power in order to continue to refine or rather restrain neighborhood development within a community. Now, what is the challenge of this? Is that these types of covenants are very common within the suburban experiment. And as you'll have heard many times through the Strong Towns language, suburban experiment is a radical departure from the traditional development pattern. And in the language that we use, it was a large bet, a very significant bet on a new untested type of development pattern that it has very risky consequences. We've gone all in on this pattern of development, and a hallmark of this pattern of development is that it leaves entire neighborhoods in a state of perpetual adolescence. And this is the outcome to be avoided. This is the outcome that actually constrains and restricts all of the things that emerge as growth happens, that you create the conditions for basically this suppressing of not only the available supply, but you also suppress sort of the natural responses to the increase of need within a place. So that the only way to respond to that need is after a long sustained period of pressure building and building and building, at which point finally you try to say, let's turn that adolescent into a grandfather. Well, it doesn't work that way. No natural organic system works that way, but we've tried to, through mechanized tools like zoning restrictions and even these types of neighborhood-wide covenants, really restrict these types of things. Teens are great, but we want them to grow up, and we should have the same expectation for our neighborhoods. And so I'll close with this and then throw this question over to Edward as well, is our core principle that really helps a lot of people to sort of come into an understanding of our general vision for neighborhoods as they continue to evolve, is that no neighborhood should be subject to radical change. At the same time, no neighborhood should be exempt from change. Because to do either of those things is to significantly disrupt sort of the natural organic emergence of new opportunities, new needs, and responses to those needs within places, new opportunities for neighborhood investment. One of the things I am on a campaign to really popularize the idea that, yes, infill has its place as a term, the idea of infill, but I always say infill sounds like something you get at the dentist. What we are just describing is neighborhood investment, people investing in their neighborhoods, and that has so much to do with what it takes for neighborhoods to continue to evolve and to mature. And so that is a first layer, quite a response to the question of what is a strong town's perspective on these types of covenants. Edward, could you flesh that out?
Yeah, I mean, this is a really difficult piece because these covenants are usually associated with the deeds of properties. So, so those deeds of properties roll with the land. Um, in the jurisdictions I've worked in, we couldn't, as a city, because we were not participatory in the writing of those deeds, we couldn't really regulate a lot of that stuff. So that makes it really, really tough to go. Neighbors, you'll see in let's say more mature neighborhoods that have all these deeds and covenants. When I was growing up, the big thing were things like fence heights, satellite dishes. Remember the really big 8-foot satellite dishes? The deeds and covenants prohibited those in neighborhoods. That's tough. When we go back to kind of the dark days of planning, I've bought homes in the South, and I've looked at the deeds, and there were restrictions of who could actually purchase the homes. Really nefarious type things, segregating people out in communities. Um, so yeah, it's real. That is really tough. Cities have to be bold on these pieces. And at Strong Towns, when we look at radical change, when we look at neighborhoods, getting them out of regulatory amber, let me tell you from somebody that worked in City Hall, the neighborhoods that are, let's say, the suburban neighborhoods, following that suburban development pattern. Another way to describe them is that those are complicated neighborhoods. They've gone through a lot of complicated approaches to go and be the most efficient community layout planning as possible. But they also are communities that do not expect any change. The only change I would see in those neighborhoods would be the color of people's front doors and the size of the trees we plant on the streets. So we don't see those changes. Um, I would not advise somebody at your first challenge of change to look in those neighborhoods. What I would encourage you to look at are look at the neighborhoods that are proven complex neighborhoods, the traditional development patterns. These may be within your downtowns. There may be fear of all of that change that's out there. So we've added extra covenants on top of that. We've added historic preservation boards, Main Street review, design committees to protect that. I get that. We've had 8 decades of terrible development patterns. We don't want to see that. So when I'm working with folks and a lot of I know we've got some of our accelerators on the call today. Uh, Things that I'm advising is let's look at those areas where there's some wiggle room. Covenants can be overrun. They can be changed just like anything else. It's a different process. Um, so just really looking deeply into it. We need to recognize that that is a struggle out there. We need to recognize where it comes. We need to talk about it openly so it's not just hidden in a deed and not be afraid to tackle that. The tackling of it may be very, very incremental. It may be slow. Let's find the places in our cities where that process won't be slow.
Thank you, Edward. That's great, and certainly the great point here from Greg as well that the biggest challenge is that they are typically established by the developer who owns all of the property, and so can basically establish every sort of element of it. But this actually runs contrary to the idea of living in a vibrant sort of evolving neighborhood. And it really almost harkens back to the days of the company town where everything was dictated to you. And so from a perspective of freedom, the idea that everything is defined in that way, you certainly go on Reddit and find these stories of HOAs run amok. And a key part of that is that they are enforcing the terms of these covenants often to the nth degree and creating what I hope at times becomes the absurdity that ultimately results in their reform as we continue to go along. Let's take up another question here, which is from Don, who is with us today. So Don, feel free to jump in as well as we continue through the conversation. But Don asked, a small town in northwest Mississippi is at a crossroads of two highways, and the Chamber of Commerce owns a 50-acre parcel of land, which they have been marketing as an industrial site since 2017, in the hopes for that to become a large job creating project. Meanwhile, the county has three aging high schools and plans to consolidate them into one new high school, but lacks the required 75 acres that would be required for that single site location. So they've been working, and there are different sort of groups within the community saying, like, look, if the chamber has 50 acres and we can buy another 25 acres of land nearby, right adjacent to it, why don't we do that so that we can have this school? Don went on and he said, look, my perspective is that a new school would contribute more to the long-term job growth of our community if we can improve our education and retain local talent. And so is this correct? Should I advocate for this position that, to really be compelling a chamber to maybe give up on its plans for the economic capacity that would be available at the site and instead to use it for educational capacity building? And he asked, I summed up his question saying, does prioritizing a new high school over speculative industrial development align with Strongtown's principles of financial resilience, incremental growth, and local wealth building? Edward, I'm going to throw it over to you to get us started.
Yeah, so this is always crazy. I don't know if anybody ever follows the way schools are built, um, but this is the pattern that every community that I'm aware of follows. Our school building programs are a very top-down approach. It has to do with the funding, the standards, and frankly, the fact that a principal or even a school board really, their job and their primary passion is on education, not development or building. Um, so all of these end up being in the wrong place, and we ask why they're in the wrong place, and it usually starts with the design standards. So in a lot of the schools, when we look at these types of school sites, they have to be large. In West Virginia, where I'm at, a high school needs 100 acres to start. Now, it's not that the high school is 100 acres of a footprint of a building with the baseball and football fields and the running track and all of that. It's a number that was selected because somewhere along the line, somebody thought that was an appropriate size for a school. So it requires us to make decisions that don't make sense, and schools get then pushed to the edge of town, right?
Mhm.
Because where can you find 100 acres in the middle of your city? Um, when we look at the numbers of these things, it is interesting to think through this about wealth building. Um, this is not just a dollars and cents piece when we talk about schools. There's also this other piece that we have to be thinking about of social capital. So when we look on the job creation, there are jobs that are created in schools, not that many because they're the way these are built out. There's also, believe it or not, if you look at industrial development, there are not that many jobs created with large format factories. Well, things are automated, so it's really surprising how few people are actually in those places. So a lot of this speculative work that happens with schools um, also is fed by how the schools are funded, not only from the state, but also from a thing called impact fees. It's money that has to be spent within a certain time frame. So if you have a lot of money, you have a time frame to spend it, you have to find big pieces of land. This is what happens. So it, this, for me, this is something, especially with schools, that I am really interested in because if I look at the development pattern of schools, I would relate it to the same exercise, the same methodology that we use for highways, not just expansion, but the development and alignment of highways through our cities. These are on the edge, so we don't think about it, but it follows all the suburban patterns, following all those
Mhm.
horrible practices um, as we think through those pieces. So this is a tough one, Norm. This is a because there's lots of people involved on this. The school
Mhm.
board, the folks that are working on industrial development, the speculative development side of it. Who doesn't want a school? Fastest way to get political support is to march in a whole bunch of young kids. Like we all want the very best for it. And this is, something that's brand new, shiny and new is going to be great. Like, why wouldn't we want that? But really looking at those, I have
Mhm.
a hard time. We recently moved to elementary school from a walkable school to a busing school. It added 27 buses now to the school district. All those have an annual cost. Those are not calculated into the construction cost.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
Easily $100,000 per school annually to operate and keep those buses up and going. That's a lot of hidden costs.
Not to mention as well, I mean, for a high school, you're already at attracting students that are of working age. So you are exporting your workforce from your towns into sort of an offsite sort of greenfield location, placing them near the highway. I'm critical, Don, I want to first begin to say like there is a genuine desire to do right by the community, and this is something that's really important. Couple of the warning signs that are there, which is where there are three high schools, there are probably some really clear things that you could do to use and improve the capacity of each of those sites while retaining their stored capacity to be pillars within the existing institutions. I was in Muskegon, Michigan, and chatting with some of the residents there, and they were bemoaning the fact that they had consolidated their high schools, which meant that they in their language, they said, we lost our high school. No longer do we see the students walking to their part-time job that they can get in while they're taking, courses in the morning and then walking over to their sites. You're also placing a lot of people onto your main corridors that are driving to and from this location. By consolidating all of this, in the Strong Tense lingo, we talk about sort of the prizing of efficiency, but actually then out of that lacking stability, lacking resilience, and extracting much of the wealth building opportunities that actually do come from a school, extracting that from its current location and just moving it to a site where none of those co-location benefits are going to occur, where there is no grocer or donut shop owner that is going to benefit from proximity because there's just no way to incorporate that. And I should say the image in the background is not the image of Don's proposed school site. This was a very, this is what came to mind. This is an elementary school, but you can see the way in which it's been designed so that it is not meant for anyone to arrive by anything other than a bus or by a private automobile, and very hard for a community to have it be integrated into the rest of what's going on. There are opportunities in existing communities to use scarce resources very effectively, and this is one of those areas where I think the ideal of this type of project is, well, now we have a very clear bond issuance. It is very clear what the proposition is. Are you in favor of the new big project or are you not? If it's about, can we improve the showers in the boys' locker room? Can we do a bunch of these other things? That's so much more granular, and people will struggle to really be captured by it unless you can begin to develop that sense of community pride that says, our schools are not in the condition that they should be. Here are actually things that we can do either in a workday or in the building of local capacity to improve that space. The other thing I would challenge is that if that site has not, since 2007, been attractive, even with, as you mentioned in some of the explanatory material, if it's not been attractive to development for those that are incentivized to develop there, the question is it perhaps that it is too far out of bounds from your existing communities? It's out of the township sort of limits. Is it also poorly situated for sort of the regular types of activity that even a industrial level developer would be looking for? And if so, that actually suggests that it is even less proper of a site for a school to be situated, particularly a mega school or consolidated school. We're not instinctively against the idea of consolidating. Sometimes that's necessary, but much of the drive to do so is driven by the idea that there's an envelope of funding for new construction that does not exist for rehabilitation and adaptation of existing spaces, and a discounting of the true value of having these institutions in existing neighborhoods within walkable reach of employers, as well as the other types of cultural things that are in the community. Sometimes the quest of the football coach to just have the best program in the county it almost becomes sort of the rallying cry that if you care about our students and you want to ensure their futures, let's make sure that they have a great sort of space like this. But one of the things that we were challenged by in Norman, Oklahoma, when we were working there, where they have a great university, they said everybody leaves afterwards. And this is one of the challenges of a education as retention strategy is that if you're doing it at the high school level, a college town that is also having the same problem, they're more likely to actually have a hold on people. So the question is, how do you become a place that people want to return to? How do you become a place that people are genuinely passionate to return to, even after they've gone overseas or gone to other states, gone and pursued higher education, or gone and practiced other in other areas, and then return to raise a family? And the thing is, it's often going to be because they are in love with the neighborhood. They love the people already, but they feel like they can build a good life and a prospering place in your community. And extracting the thing that actually has really the potential to be the heartbeat of your community and moving it off site is almost like offshoring the manufacturing that we so desperately need in our communities as well. And so really interesting. Let's also pivot from this. And I love Aaron's comment in the chat as well, the redevelopment story. Thank you, Edward, for posting that in there. But I do want to pivot now to offer an opportunity for Damien Mavis to come on. And I'd love to hear from Damien because, as I said, I met him when I connected with him in San Luis Obispo. We actually had an opportunity. Let me make sure. Oh, here. I do have slides for this. So we met in San Luis Obispo, and part of his work is to establish new developments within existing neighborhoods, weave them into the framework that already exists within a place, but create spaces that generate more activity. Create, as in one of the spaces that we met at in this coffee shop that he had redeveloped out of an older industrial building, was to create the spaces for numerous buildings to be situated and numerous types of businesses to be present there. So there was a wine lab in this one, the little icon there, KBRG Coffee Lab, is where this image was taken, where we had a meet up with the Strong Towns Local Conversation there, as well as their group, Better Slow. And so, Damien, I'd love for you to go ahead, and if you want to share any slides or project descriptions, but I want to touch on what are the core challenges of adaptive reuse of older sites, as well as building more robust neighborhoods, integrating more things into the fabric of places that we've already determined are going to be urban, but are always in need of further sort of development and organic enhancement. So welcome, Damien, and why don't you take it away?
Thank you. As I said, my name is Damien Mavis. I'm one of the founders of Covelop. We're a local real estate development company in San Luis Obispo. San Luis Obispo is kind of halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco, real near the coast. Cal Poly is our local university, and that really is a big part of our town. And then we have a nice, quaint downtown and kind of a beautiful green belt around it. So I went to Cal Poly and I never left, and linked up with a group called Building a Better Slow. That's where I met Norm. We were lucky enough to have him as a really great guest speaker. But one of the things that we do is we look at redevelopment and incremental development of commercial spaces within existing neighborhoods, with really the idea of creating a third place, right? And a third place is a term coined by Roy Oldenburg, which is, not your home, which is the first place, not your work, which is the second place, but third place is really where you choose to be. And it could be anything from a church to a gym to a bar. Think of Cheers to a kind of a local gathering place. And to us, it was obviously from a civic pride standpoint, we wanted to do this, but we also, see what's happening with Amazon and outsourcing and struggles in retail, and really looked at how do we kind of internet-proof retail, and really that became small local development and curating it in a fashion where people want to be. So I have kind of two examples. One's called the Creamery. It's actually was a historic creamery in downtown San Luis Obispo. These are sort of generous before pictures. By the time we became part of it, it was really decrepit. and in a bad state of disrepair, a ton of vacancy. The conversion to a retail destination had already happened in the 1970s, sort of poorly done. For instance, this upper right-hand picture was the driveway in, very narrow, no real pedestrian access, certainly no ADA access. And then if you look at the bottom left, it became basically all the usable outdoor space was devoted to parking. So this is kind of sort of a block diagram. It's about 30,000 square feet. So the picture off to the right is what became of the parking lot, and we think that it turned into a better use. And then this parking lot number 2 is actually, we have 36 apartments being built in that parking lot. And then parking lot number 1, we have a plan for a hotel to be built there. But all of these, very much food and beverage, that's really all the kind of orange units. The orange and green with a little bit of the blue, which is retail. But that is one thing we found was food and beverage really, you can't go to the internet. Well, at least before DoorDash, you really couldn't go to the internet to get your food and beverage. But then these are some various after pictures of the project. And really shows this active outdoor area. The picture, kind of the 2 pictures in the upper left-hand corner, I think are kind of an interesting comparison. The far left shows kind of a standard parking lot with all of our new and old refurbished development. And then the next one over shows this little coffee shop with this little alley, and this used to be a parking lot. And it kind of shows the difference of, if you get rid of cars, what you can do, and the idea of developing a sense of place. So I think that those are a couple of good pictures that really show the difference if you're able to get rid of cars. We were able to get rid of cars because we're in this walkable downtown. I have an example of an area where we couldn't. We also were lucky in our downtown. You are able to calculate your parking requirement and then pay to have those parking spaces, basically an in lieu fee, and not provide the parking. However, it's extremely expensive. Currently, each parking space, if you're not going to provide it on site, costs about $30,000. So I would say today, this project was done in 2018. That fee was more like $20,000. Today, it would be much more difficult to pull this off with increased construction costs, increased borrowing costs, increased fees. And unfortunately, we haven't seen a ton of rent growth. So, that is something that people embarking on these incremental development projects now, I think, do have a harder time than we may have had several years ago. This is kind of interesting. So our hometown, San Luis Obispo, it's abbreviated SLO, SLO, and there's the play on words, the slow life, and so we decided to play on that with a mural that is called Slow Irresistible. And it's interesting. We sort of started the mural craze that happened here in our little town, but at first we had a heck of a time getting this permitted because it had words on it. And so since it had words on it, it was considered a sign, and the words were too big for it to be a sign. So I hate to admit it, but we basically just lied. And whether we we dimensioned our sign in meters instead of feet, and just everything became a lot smaller, and we got it passed. And now it's, interestingly enough, actually shown on the city's website in their new sign ordinance as what's possible with their new sign ordinance. But that's not the point. The point is, and anybody that's looking at doing incremental development from a commercial aspect, the internet's here, Instagram is here, and if you can put up something that's colorful and people want their picture taken in front of it, it will get you essentially free press. So this is just a smattering. We have a hashtag slow irresistible. If you look it up, you'll see whether it's couples that have just gotten married that are having their picture taken in front of it, or pets or kids or bicycles, etc. It was something that was unexpected, but easily replicable anywhere in the world, so to speak, and something I would highly recommend doing because it has paid dividends. This other project called Duncan Alley. This is where we met out front for the coffee chat. Is a little farther away from downtown. There isn't that ability to buy out our spaces. And so we had to very carefully assign certain spaces to certain uses and use certain parking reductions to be able to make this essentially a legal adaptation of this kind of derelict 3 metal buildings. And we changed this to this micro manufacturing where basically everybody has to be essentially a third place. And to the extent possible, we want you to make what you sell in the front in the back. So like El Lugar Wines has a small winery attached to a tasting room, and the winemaker proprietor is standing behind the counter and serving you a glass of wine, and then he can, point behind him and show the actual barrels that the wine came out of. We also have a couple of gyms type of thing where, these are all things that people want to go to. And about 1,000 homes have been built in the area with no authentic third place, and it's become that kind of third place. So bottom left-hand corner is what it looked like before when we bought it, just standard kind of metal buildings. And then these are a variety of pictures of kind of what we did with it. Another kind of before and after picture. This is our anchor tenant, Ancient Owl. It's a beer garden. And you see kids and families and, picnickers on this little lawn in front, and it's become, a great community gathering place. It's right on a bike path. Again, unfortunately, there's no people, but this is where we met with Norm out in front of this new coffee shop. We branded it Duncan Alley. Everybody likes an alley, and it's on Duncan Street, so we branded it Duncan Alley. We did another mural there, and there's a fair number of Instagram hits on that. We tried to also, with bricks and different paving, try to, kind of reapportion that parking lot to prioritize pedestrians. It's difficult to do, but we kind of did our best shot at it. And then Norm asked to say a few things about parking, because parking in my professional career has been always very, very difficult to deal with. And I don't know who Alan Jacobs is, but I thought it was a great quote. No great city has ever been known for its abundant supply of parking. And I think that that's so true, is when you think of like sense of place, it's never how easy it is to park. And that being said, we're a for-profit builder and developer, and we understand, you need to cater to the people. And if the people need to park, then, you're sort of stuck with it and you have to accommodate it. But I would say when you think of place, if you can replace that parking lot with something that's a plaza or, sort of an organic meeting place or, the concept of a third place, I think you end up getting much more reward for it than just parking. Because one thing about parking, you'll never have enough. People will always complain about it. Your tenants will use it, even though you write it into your lease that the tenants' employees can't use it, that it's only available for 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 customers. And as soon as you tow somebody, you automatically become the bad guy. So I would say, your project will not be known for its abundant supply of parking. And if there's a way to kind of pivot away from that, I think that is kind of a sound idea. So I guess that's kind of my presentation in a nutshell, and happy to contribute any other ways.
Thank you, Damien. I love it. And I mean, this is often the case when you look at the various gaps that exist within our civic landscape. And we say, there are significant portions that are either underdeveloped or very lightly developed, or in a case like that, where you could see even the design of the existing buildings were sort of buffered against the street, really not welcoming. You had to like search with an eyeglass in order to find the front door. Like kind of those conditions are present. And I guess one of the if I think of our Strong Towns audience and members that want to see more like this, like how do we get more like this? Because it would be easier for you, and I'm sure there probably are projects that you've done that are on the outskirts of the city, sort of at the highway, rest stop, like sort of just adjacent to that. But how do we see these types of projects get woven into existing neighborhoods?
Yeah, I think it's important to have a municipality that supports it, right? Through
Yeah.
zoning. Some of these are just not allowed via zoning. So
Yeah.
if they're just not allowed, you're going to have an incredible uphill battle to get it to be allowed. And then the idea of parking minimums, kind of, getting rid of those. It's a big idea for municipalities to grapple with, but it certainly is a huge impediment to building something that's nice. And obviously parking and transportation is changing all the time, and to have these kind of antiquated parking ratios doesn't make a lot of sense. And a huge portion of the construction costs can be wound up in parking. Like, for instance, if it costs $30,000 to get rid of a parking space and you need 2 parking spaces to build an apartment, all of a sudden that parking space added $100 a square foot to your construction costs. That's a huge, huge deal, and that's if you're lucky that you can just buy your way out of a parking space. So,
Yeah.
it's a tough balance to strike.
Yeah. I'd love to either field questions in the chat if you want to just raise your hand and ask particular questions of Damien. But Edward, your part of your work, Edward Erfurt, meet Damien. Edward is our chief technical advisor and worked on the other side of the bench, which was on the side of the city, working with project owners or property owners rather, to, I would say in many ways, do many more of the things that Damien, you've been doing, which was moving the building towards the street. So that way it actually like interfaces well with the street. Edward, what were some of the other strategies that you took? Because I think Damien's point is right, which is you need a place that is willing to do this. And then it's almost like, magic, snap of the fingers, make it happen. It's like, no, there are precursors or sort of elements that are there. I think sometimes that city staff can be influential in. Sometimes it's a developer saying, hey, this is a really good project. It'll look amazing. You're going to put it on your website once it's done. And then there's the third role is the concerned citizen that just says, I want more third places. Edward, do you have any thoughts on both what Damien shared, but also how do we get this sort of restarted, this whole cycle of adaptively or adapting and reusing existing spaces?
Yeah, I think speaking from somebody that was in City Hall for a long time, I always found these types of projects really exciting for me. And every city I'd go to, I'd meet with city staff. Many of you probably are sitting in the ranks of City Hall and would love to see something like this in your community. There's a lot of things that we can do that meet the code but may not be apparent in the code. So, like how one might calculate parking, or how you might define the uses of the building, or even the square footage of the alley. Like if we were going to be really staunch on the code, there's some places that if you put a table outside on a sidewalk, you now have to provide square footage and restrooms and all of that for that table. Uh, what I would look at from City Hall is that what is the risk of some of that outside area? What is the worst thing that could happen? And Damien, the before pictures, it's like, could it get worse than that? You know, like could it get worse? What would happen if I actually get somebody that cares about the community and wants to take some risk? They're not asking anything from the city, but maybe we need to just think about things like parking and how we classify the uses or how we allocate impact fees for this to think about that on the inside. That I find is really important. I also find at a city, one of the things I always train my staff is that we should always start with yes, which is not what they teach you when you get into government. Like it's always easier to say no. But on that, if somebody would come in with some crazy idea to take a kind of an abandoned area and then we're going to do stuff outside in it, and then what's a parking lot, they're going to call it an alleyway. Let's say yes to it to hear the story. Yes, we would like to know more. Yes, we'd like for you to demonstrate how this is happening. Yes, we'd love to see private investment in this area. I found that we have at some point we might get to a no. Like if
Right.
Damien really wanted to propose something that was like totally off the charts. But
Yeah.
most of the time, the I can speak from at City Hall, we don't realize that the entrepreneurs out there are also trying to learn as they go.
Mhm.
And by allowing them to kind of talk to their vision, there are ways we can work on this. Um, I'll share something that I learned when I was living in Orlando. Um, and I know all of it has changed now because they've updated their comprehensive plan and zoning ahead of time or since then. But when I was in Orlando, in one of the industrial areas, brewery opened up. So it's not the Disneyland area. This is like the really rough industrial area south of downtown in the shadow of I-4. A brewery opened up and they had a tap room. The place became so popular with people, they couldn't sell because of the laws. They couldn't sell alcohol. You could only tip the people that were pouring the taps.
Yeah.
So you would be there and there was like a gracious tip you had to leave, which is kind of the transactional piece. It became really popular so that their parking lot, they had to close their parking lot on Fridays and Saturdays because there was cornhole and tables. And then they couldn't serve food. So all of a sudden, two or three food trucks showed up. And all of a sudden, what became a brewery became a tap house that became a beer garden that was super, super popular. Guess who was there every Friday night? It was all of the planning and zoning staff for the city.
Mhm.
When complaints came in, the planning and zoning staff didn't sit there and say, "Oh, we've got to shut this horrible nuisance down." They said, "We love this place. This is our third place. Where in the code do we have wiggle room to make this legal?"
Mhm.
And they had conversations with the brewery to say, "Look, you have now triggered something that you need restrooms. You don't have to build restrooms. You just need to make sure that there are porta johns on the site."
Yeah.
And it's like this is something you know you need to provide. This is where it would be permitted in the zoning. Let me point when I'm there Friday, I'll point to where it needs to go and do that. Having that type of dialogue, Damien, I don't know if you had people in the city that were on your side that kind of showed you the ropes, that you didn't have to do a lot of convincing to, that got like nervous and shook a little bit in excitement. But I always find those folks in City Hall, they all exist, and it's a matter of finding them and working with them mutually.
Yeah, I agree. And there's certainly, we have a great city staff and city leadership that is accommodating as possible and creative as possible. So we're really lucky, but yeah, we have been stymied by, certain codes and, fire sprinklers and, all these things that they're not ill-intentioned, but it's all stuff that has to be dealt with
Yeah.
when you're doing an adaptive reuse.
It's a matter of asking how far we can push it. Like, at what point, yes, we need fire sprinklers. We want to make sure people get out. But where is that trigger point? And how close can we get to that before it rolls over? The thing that I think a lot of people lose sight of is that in that project, it looks great, but behind it on paper, there's a lot of money at risk there. And the decisions that are made and the direction you're provided from City Hall impact real dollars, impacts whether or not your family will have a paycheck at the end of the week. It's really that frank on it. So really, really being clear with that and outlining that I find is important. Also allowing that entrepreneurial risk. It doesn't cost the city anything to allow outdoor dining, to allow a parking space to get turned into an outdoor dining or seating area, or to allow stuff to come out on the sidewalk and have extra sale space. There's a huge upside for a community. If you meet all the ADA and all the safety and it's, nicely, tastefully done, all the things, but the upside is quite significant in job creation, sales tax, building a strong business partner, uh, inviting others to do the same. That's builds that vibrant environment that we all love, that as humans we're attracted to. And allowing that and not initially rejecting it at City Hall, allowing for everybody to have a little bit of risk. I found that if it didn't work out, we'll deal with that. But the upside is so huge. We just can't forget that.
I think that's very well said. And to tag on to one of the things you said, the previous city manager had a saying that, he didn't want to have any late hits. So, let's get all the rules of the game out in front. They were very big on pre-application meetings. And then, once the go or no go decision is made, then everything should just, from the city perspective, should be very expected with no late hits. And that's something that I think is super important from a developer's point of view, because there isn't endless amounts of money or bank financing, et cetera, et cetera. We gotta build within our means. So we need to know what the rules are up front.
But it certainly seems to me, I mean, when you said there's 1,000 homes in the area, so that's maybe a population of about 3,000 people with very few other alternative options. Like that's a captive market that is just a few years away from suddenly becoming a very loyal audience, a very loyal sort of customer base. And I think one of the elements that stands out is that Don, maybe in your community in Mississippi, things are there, it's on a smaller scale, and the types of sort of money coming in versus money that's available is going to look a little bit different. But the core principles of saying like we need to make our places more productive, our streets, the more that we can do, as we sat on right next to the street, we were buffered from the Strode, which was just like blasting by, but we were buffered, and all of a sudden it was a safe, livable, inviting space for us to be in, to have a group discussion together, to be able to carry on those things. And none of those factors change in a large city, a small city, an urban, a rural municipality. So many of those key features of what makes a great place, I think, are shared. And I think we're slowly helping more and more folks to really recapture that sense and that vision of what it takes to build prosperous communities that work for all. We are at the top of the hour here, and I do want to just draw attention to Damien again once more. Thank you for representing your work to us, to just, I think, enlighten and inspire us as well. SLO, I will say, is irresistible. It is a fantastic place to be, but I would definitely recommend others to check out their work, as well as continue to dabble in the question of what can either you as a technical professional do in your community to begin to move the needle on these things, working to reestablish sort of an operating system that is adaptable and open to these types of things, really taking into account sometimes the needs of developers and city managers to not have late hits, but at the same time saying, can we push the envelope? Can we do more and really make a difference? And when we do that, that's how we build safe and prosperous and inviting communities that really do pay their fair share, more than earn their keep, and build lasting prosperity where we live. With that, thanks for being a Strong Towns member today. And as always, take care and take care of your places.